You are listening to the ESG and Coffee podcast on investment, strategy, and sustainability, hosted by Graham Sinclair.
Well, I had a career that preceded my investment career. So my first memory of investing was actually talking to a very nice gentleman who was one of the kind of early leaders of sustainable investing in the UK, convincing me to start a pension. And that was probably in the late 90s. At the moment, it's really, really hot. Everyone wants to have one of these things,
right? To
have sustainability, to have ESG. That will wane, I think, at some point. And we certainly did the hard yards when it wasn't popular. And being in an independent business that's owned by the partners and some very long-term backers that we have means that we can be kind of committed and long-term and thoughtful about this is all we want to do. This is all we'll ever do.
The ESG and Coffee podcast interviews leading voices making investment and the business of investment happen around the world in their own words. Long-form interviews offer experts the time to share insights with nuance. In Season 1 of the ESG and Coffee podcast, we're meeting the originals, who have been working on ESG positive investment for longer than the last bonus cycle. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance factors, historically forgotten in investment as usual. ESG matters not only to asset managers and investment advisors, but to every organization looking for finance or investment, from trillion-dollar companies to governments to small businesses on Main Street. Reach us on Twitter at ESG and Coffee to recommend any compelling guests for Season 1, The Originals. And please subscribe. Here is Graham Sinclair to introduce today's episode.
I'm excited for you to listen to the interview with Seb Beloe, partner and head of research at WHEB Asset Management. I first met Seb when he was working in the City of London for a major investment company in the mid-2000s with Nick Robbins and Mark Campanale, if I recall. You can hear from the quality of Seb's answers, the clarity, the nuance. You can hear the experience of someone who's been doing this for a very long time. What you'll learn in today's interview is the move from low carbon to zero carbon is happening right now. You'll hear why WHEB does not have a single answer to what is your carbon price, and that they do not invest in the FANGs and why. FANGs being Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. And you'll hear about the WHEB Impact Calculator, which Seb and his team developed, which is trying to make tangible to investors the math of their investments and the impact of the portfolio company in nature and society. You'll hear Seb introduce me to one of his legends, Jeremy Leggett. You'll hear him try to have me re-look at a food kit service and explain to me what over-egged means. If you're coming into sustainability and investment, Seb wants you to be passionate, keep your standards high, and don't settle for greenwashing. Listen for all the experience that Seb shares. He's one of the originals. Here's my interview with Seb Beloe. Well, here we are on our first call. In this episode in Season 1, I'm pleased to welcome to the ESG and Coffee podcast one of the originals making ESG positive investment happen, Seb Beloe, partner and head of research at WHEB Asset Management, WHEB Asset Management. Please check the episode note for more on Seb. He's on Twitter at Seb Beloe and on LinkedIn. And he describes himself as environmentalist, investor, partner, and head of research at WHEB Sustainable. Welcome, Seb Beloe.
Thank you very much, Graham. Good to be here.
Where in the world are you today, sir?
I am still at home. We're still in lockdown in the UK. So just outside, just sort of northeast of London, out in the countryside.
Excellent, excellent. And if we were together in real life and we're at your local coffee shop, cafe, maybe the corner pub being in the UK, what would I be ordering for you to drink?
Well, it's afternoon my time, so I tend to have a cup of tea in the afternoon, I'm afraid. So a nice cup of Earl Grey and perhaps a little bit of cake.
Very good. Well played. What type of cake?
I think probably a bit of carrot cake today. That's what I like.
Good call. Good call. Nice one. Organic carrots, of course. Yes. Do you have a cup of coffee with you now?
I do. Thank you. Yeah.
Well played. Good. So I found it really useful lately to look at people who've been around a long time. That's hence my kind of reflection on experience. I'd also like to hat tip to you two for the Innocence and Experience tour. That's uplifted me through the COVID time. So starting off with Sir David Attenborough's superb Netflix documentary, Our Planet. Have you watched that at all?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, nice. He references two significant data points, which really jumped out at me. So I went ahead and asked you to look at those data points for yourself and then added an extra. So in the year you earned your first career paycheck, which you do not have to tell us, but happy to hear it if you want to share, roughly how much was each of those data points? I'm going to ask you the data point. You'll give me the answer. World population.
It was 5.7 billion.
S&P 500?
S&P 500 was at 480.
Huh. And concentration of carbon dioxide in parts per million?
It was 350 parts per million.
Wow. So for reference, today, 7.9 billion humans. S&P 500 is at 3,889. And CO2 equivalents measured at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory is 416. And that's just in your kind of working career lifestyle. How does that make you feel hearing those data points? Was it fun to look that up and kind of reflect?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and it was 1994 when I had my first paycheck. So, which doesn't feel that long ago to me, but I guess it's, it is now over 25, more than 25 years ago. Yeah, I mean, it is astonishing, isn't it, that the population 5.7 to 7.9, it's a big jump, and perhaps most extraordinary of all is the CO2 parts per million, really, which has gone, and is still accelerating, isn't it? So it's pretty sobering.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so that's where we are, and let's jump now to some espresso shot questions. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. What is your earliest memory of investing?
Well, I had a career that preceded my investment career. So my first memory of investing was actually talking to a very nice gentleman who was one of the kind of early leaders of sustainable investing in the UK, convincing me to start a pension. And that was probably in the late 90s.
Okay, fair enough. How would you describe your philosophy of investing in one sentence?
Yeah, I mean, in one sentence, it's about investing in a kind of epoch scale change to a zero carbon, more sustainable economy, and finding the businesses that are enabling that change.
Excellent. We should take bets on who else uses epoch in the series. I say no one is my bet. Well done. How do you choose to define sustainable investment or investing with ESG factors in less than 30 words?
So I'm on the technical committee of a standard setting body that is answering this question. So I'll give you rather a technical definition, but sustainable investing is the application of investment services that explicitly seek to achieve the goal of sustainability, which is slightly dodging the question because I still haven't defined what sustainability is.
Right.
It's about finding investments that are providing solutions to critical social environmental challenges, in my view, and it's a holistic concept. So it's both what a company does and how it does it. That's what sustainable investing should embrace.
Nice. I think you landed on it. And that last one, that's the one you should put on your T-shirt. So. And what switched you on to ESG? Was there something when you were a kid or working career, college? What switched you on?
I have always, I got into environmentalism when I was very young. I've always been a passionate environmentalist. I think that's probably changed in terms of what I meant by that, from being about saving, biodiversity, still very much about that, but a more technical understanding of it. But I've always felt like this is the best way of running a business. with these factors in mind, it's the best way of investing. So I can't really point to a time.
Okay.
I think I've always felt that this is just the way it should be done.
Okay. And so the hardest question of our first session here is, what is your biggest investing mistake? I know I've made some, I mostly about stuff I should have invested in and I meant to, and I never clicked send. I mean, what is your biggest investing mistake?
Well, I'm going to slightly dodge the question in the sense that I think my biggest investing mistake, before I joined the investment world, as I said, I had a different career. I kind of assumed it was going to be really easy, that it was just about finding, I don't know, wind turbine manufacturers and investing in them. And that was kind of, how difficult can it be, was kind of my view. Well, yeah, it can be very, very difficult. But so my mistake was to think it was going to be easy.
Okay, fair enough. Well, as we'll learn when we dive into your role and the strategy, I think you guys have done a pretty good job of following a certain path and making it fairly easy for people. They are, have a look to my listeners and viewers, have a look at YouTube, where I've linked to some of the WHEB Asset Management work. Right, let's flip over then to drilling down and unpacking a bit more on your role. And I'll just pull out some things I found interesting, Seb, if you don't mind just responding to them. So let me quote here from your website. It says, quote, WHEB is a positive impact investor focused on the opportunities created by the transition to a low carbon and sustainable global economy. We focus on a single global equity strategy, which has been developed over the long term and tested across market cycles. We are an owner-managed partnership that is incentivized to make long-term decisions. So there's quite a lot going on there in terms of the business of investment as well as to the strategy. I mean, the first thing that jumps out at me is that it's a partnership, so everyone's bought in. It's kind of the joy of having an employee-owned operation in a way. And then, you've gone there straight away, and obviously you would in terms of long-term. And then, the carefully chosen words about being a positive impact investor. Maybe I'm assuming you were involved in the crafting of some of that, or this is how you choose to describe your role in the shop. Can you just, first of all, unpack for us a bit about how you chose to use those words to explain what you guys are trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, maybe to start in kind of reverse order from the quote, but in terms of the partnership and the long-term decision-making, I mean, we've all, the three partners, Ted Franks, George Latham, and myself, all worked in larger asset managers for many years before we came to WHEB.
Oh, that's where we met, in London, I think.
That's right, yeah, many years ago. And experienced the fickleness, I think it's fair to say, of appetite for this kind of investment in a mainstream asset manager. At the moment, it's really, really hot. Everyone wants to have one of these things. Right. To have sustainability, to have ESG. Right. That will wane, I think, at some point. And we certainly did the hard yards when it wasn't popular. And being in an independent business that's owned by the partners and some very long-term backers that we have means that we can be kind of committed and long-term and thoughtful about this is all we want to do. This is all we'll ever do. So we can. And if you're in a bigger business, which is a listed business, then you have to move with the market much more. So that's kind of why that's important. I think in terms of the core message around positive impact, we're all absolutely committed to this idea, and I think it's becoming clearer to everyone really that the world is in this transition phase to what we now call a zero carbon and more sustainable economy. I need to make sure we update that on the website. So it's low carbon, zero carbon.
You're right.
And that's a profound change and affects pretty much every part of the economy. And that's what we want to invest in. We want to invest in the businesses that are accelerating that change, enabling that change. And that's still quite niche, I think, probably that kind of strategy. But it's something that we are, committed to and kind of empowered by that core focus. So that's really important for us.
Okay, and there's the asset gathering piece, there's the asset management piece. So how has that helped you find the right clients? And or have you ever found that to be a bit of a barrier? Has there been a hiccup in the first call meeting or in one of the sessions where someone on the investing committee or the person across the table goes, whoa, hang on, did you just say impact investor? Has that ever, because sometimes the jargon gets in the way.
Absolutely. And I would say that was a barrier for many years. We joined WHEB in 2012, and I would say for the first 7 years, probably, we were quite a niche strategy. People didn't really know where to put us. Are you a separate asset class? Is sustainability a separate asset class? Are you just part of global equities? You're very kind of narrowly focused. We only invest in 80% of the MSCI world is not investable for us. We're quite idiosyncratic,
right?
And that was scary to a lot of larger investors in particular. But I would say in the last 18 months that that focus has been an enormous benefit, positive characteristic for the strategy. Yeah. People have wanted to find managers who are authentic and are genuinely committed and focused on this area. And the fact that we've been doing it for so long, we've always, this statement hasn't really changed very much. I mean, we need to change that low carbon to zero carbon, but it's been the same, and that's appealing to people now. But it certainly wasn't for the first 2/3 of our time at WHEB.
And for me, some of the messages that are threaded there that I respect is positive impact. So the reflection is, people forget every investment has impact, right? It's either negative or positive. It's not neutral. Every investment has impact. And that's partly why I'm using the phrasing currently ESG positive, because again, to what I open with is every investment has ESG factors implicit. So are you ESG positive or ESG negative? So I think the fact that you describe the positive impact is very well done. So something else that's new or unusual about what you guys are doing, the guys gender neutral term, is the advisory committee. So that's something I always look to do to find advisors. Any project I've worked on, any large scale project, absolutely needs some kind of advisory, independent advisory voices. It's a very classic feature of the startup culture, for example. You guys have actually done it and you've built it into your investment process. Could you take a minute or two just to unpack how exactly does that work?
Yeah, so this is a group of people who are independent of WHEB. We pay them, not a hugely generous amount.
Is it coffee money or good coffee money?
It's a bit more than coffee money. It's got a bit better recently. But originally it was very much out of the goodness of their hearts, to be honest, right. I think, and in an interest in what we were trying to do. But they are independent, and they have their people who have reputations in the field and need to make sure that they are protecting those reputations. But they meet with us every 4 months and they basically have two roles. The first is to review the portfolio holdings. So this is after the fact. They don't have any executive authority, but we make investment decisions, buy, sell companies, and then we present that to the advisory committee every 4 months, and they basically say, yes, that makes sense, that feels consistent with the policies and philosophy of the fund, or no, that doesn't, and we can come back to that when that happens, if that happens. And then the second role is around kind of more strategic questions that we face as a business around, net zero carbon. What should that mean? How should we interpret that for our business? If there are particular stocks that we are or thematic areas that we're looking at, then we will present that to them, and they give us some guidance on that. And the key thing really about this committee is that we publish the minutes of the meeting. So you can go onto our website and you can read what was discussed. So although they can't force us to sell a company, if they really disagree with a company that we've bought, then that becomes public knowledge, and that would be we'd have to have a very good answer in order to continue to hold that business.
Has that happened?
They haven't objected to a company. They have helped us reframe themes and how we make sure that the themes are focused enough on the areas that are genuinely impactful. So that's been very helpful. And they have also, they've been they've advised us to improve different parts of our process and our reporting as well. So that's kind of where I wouldn't say there's ever been any major conflict, but there's certainly been kind of, we think you should do more of this kind of thing or less of that. And that is publicly available to people to look at.
No, I think that's excellent. That helps to differentiate you. So let me then move to another piece around the strategy. So again, I'm quoting off the website. I think it says the investment strategy of the fund is built around sustainability, growth, quality, and valuation. Now you're a bottom-up stock picking fundamental type shop. You've got a limited universe that you're looking to focus on. You talk about these 9 sustainable investment themes. So just one thing that jumped out at me there is oftentimes in the field, intellectually, people are joining dots between quality or management quality, which is what every investor claims to be looking for, at least if they're a fundamental investor, and sustainability factors kind of overlapping in some way, saying your better quality companies are people that are looking at the longer term, they're talking to all their stakeholders, so their ESG mapping is pretty good. And for us, that's a sign of quality. But you've chosen to describe it in this way. So could you just explain why you describe the strategy as sustainability, growth, quality, and valuation?
Yeah. So the principle, the sort of principal foundation of the strategy is focused on businesses that have a positive impact, and I guess we're using shorthand sustainability for that, and so businesses that are providing a product or a service that's directly addressing a social or environmental challenge. So we're not talking about most of the market. We're not talking about Amazon or Alphabet or Apple or Unilever. Big parts of the market we're not focused on. We're focused on the product delivering positive impact. So that's kind of renewable energy and health and education and water treatment and all these good things. Those businesses typically are growing more quickly than the rest of the market. So a sustainability focused, as I've just defined it, focuses you on parts of the market that are growing more quickly than the market as a whole. And thank goodness that is the case, because that's suggesting that the world is beginning to transition, because it's slowly becoming more focused on these thematic areas. So that's the bit about sustainability and growth. Quality is very much in the way that you've described. We do a lot of ESG analysis, but we very much see it within the context of helping us find better quality investments, better managed companies. So that's the kind of, if the sustainability themes is the what a company does, the products and services it makes, the ESG and the quality is how it does it, how well do they manage their business. And of course, that isn't a lens that you can apply that across any kind of company, not just the kind of thematic investments we're making. So those are the first 2 pieces. And then the third piece is around valuation. And that's a bit that we're not value investors, we are growth investors, but at the right price. So we use a valuation discipline to try and ensure that we don't overpay for companies that are very popular, that are focused on sustainability and that are high quality. Those are typically quite expensive kinds of companies. So we do have a valuation discipline to try and control how much we pay for an individual stock.
Right. So it's pretty hard to find a cheap EV stock these days, right? So
exactly, yeah. But there are things you can do, but yes, that's basically true.
Yeah. Okay. So and we're going to drill down in part 2 a bit more on some of the holdings. So I look forward to unpacking that. So let's come into land now on part 1. And I want to ask this question. I'll ask everyone that I'm talking to in the industry nowadays, because it's fairly pointed and it's a good illustration of how the shop is thinking or how the people are thinking. What price for CO2 equivalent per ton does your firm use internally for your operations as a shop? And what are you using in your portfolios?
Yeah, so I was intrigued by these questions. I mean, we don't have a CO2 price per ton. We do have a commitment to get to net zero carbon by 2025. And our big footprint is usually it's in our travel. Obviously, we haven't done any practice yet.
Yeah.
But and we do have a carbon budget for our travel that is split between marketing and investment, and we reduce that by 10% every year. So we are constraining our use of, obviously this is particularly air travel, through an absolute limit rather than a carbon price, which we're a very small business. It would be, I think, overly complicating to use a carbon price when we can just have a kind of overall budget. So that's the first question. In terms of our portfolios, we don't build detailed models of the businesses that we invest in. So we're not kind of trying to, integrate ESG in a kind of quantitative way typically. And we're also not, by definition, in heavy footprint sectors for whom carbon is a big issue. I mean, that's most of the sectors we're invested in. I mean, they're obviously, committed to reducing their carbon emissions, but it's more of a benefit than a cost, because they're typically providing a solution. So Vestas, for example, typical example, making wind turbines, they obviously use energy in their manufacturing process. But climate change in a way is an opportunity for them because people are moving to renewables. There are businesses that do have a more substantial carbon footprint, and for them, we encourage them to have an internal carbon price to ensure that they're making good, capital allocation decisions. But we don't impose our own carbon price because we don't really build a model in that way. So,
got it. And as an example, can you remember off the top of your head? You don't have to name the company, but what are ballpark numbers that some of the companies are using?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. This is a European business, so they have a link with the actual carbon price on in the European market. I think but it's somewhere above that. I think it's a percentage above the carbon price is what they're doing. So I think it's something like 20% above the carbon price off the top of my head. That's the way they do it.
Okay, great.
You are listening to the ESG and Coffee podcast, hosted by Graham Sinclair. Vous participez au podcast ESG and Coffee, offert par Graham Sinclair.
So, espresso shot questions round 2. You ready to go?
Yep.
Great. Time for a sip of coffee. Get revved up. Here we go. So, second set of 5 questions. What app is Seb most likely to be viewing on his smartphone while waiting in line?
Waiting in the queue, you mean?
Very good. Very good.
Probably Twitter.
Very nice. Very nice. Good. Oh, we got a tweet. We're going to talk about it in a bit. That's great. What book did you enjoy reading recently? Any topic, any type?
Yeah, I've read a book called A Good Time to Be a Girl, which is written by a lady called Dame Helena Morrissey, who's a well-known...
the 30% Club, right?
That's right, yeah, and former CEO of Newton Asset Management. She's an important figure in the UK investment landscape, and she's written this book called A Good Time to Be a Girl, and it was really a really good book, really interesting in terms of gender.
Excellent, thank you. We'll add that to the show notes. What is the best kind of pie?
Yeah, well, the thing about pies is the best bit of the pie is the pastry. So I don't mind too much what's in the pie, so long as it's got lots of pastry.
Well, then I'm going to push you. You mean mince pie with a shortbread pastry, or are we thinking more like apple pie?
I like sort of puff pastry. No, I was immediately thinking of like steak and kidney pie, or chicken and beef pie, or something like that. But well, not steak because of the carbon footprint. But
Cornish pasty. What does a Cornish pasty have in it?
Mush, really.
Yeah. Okay. I had an excellent one of those at a train station, by the way. So it completely did its job because it held together and it was nourishing.
A lot of pastry. Yeah.
Very good. What is your favorite movie or on-screen moment that relates to the world of investing and finance?
Yeah, this was an easy one. I thought The Big Short was just a fantastic film, and laid out what is a pretty complex part of the market for people to understand. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, with those little explainers on the side, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think we should stitch those together. And I got kids in elementary school. We should stitch those together and see if they work for the kids or something. All right, and then as an investment professional, what was or has been your most meaningful success so far? We wish you great success for many decades, sir. But what did you say? Yeah, this was pretty meaningful to me.
Well, I think the obvious answer to this is building WHEB. I mean, again, I don't know whether that's the kind of investment you make. You make, but we've gone from 25. If you'll allow me a little advertorial, we've gone from 25 million in assets under management, 25 million sterling in 2012 to 1.2 billion today. It's taken us a long time, but and most of that growth has come in the last sort of 18 months. But that's 50 times growth in 9 years. So.
Are we allowed to call asset managers unicorns if they have more than $1 billion in assets? Or is there?
Well, I'm not sure. It's still not very much money in the grand scheme.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe zebras, because you're more about the black and white. So you've reached zebra capacity.
Zebra status, yeah.
Escape velocity. Great. Well, let's drill down more into your role and the shop. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact spectrum and the impact calculator that you have. And I think it was in 2020 that you rolled out this new engine or machine in more detail. And I watched your colleague, Mr. Latham, explaining it on YouTube. And I've looked at some materials. Looks really interesting. It looks a bit complicated, a bit of math in there. Could you maybe spend a minute or two explaining that piece to us, please?
Yeah, so there are two things actually. The impact calculator is a different thing to the impact engine, which is maybe a bit complicated for people. But the impact calculator is a tool that's available on our website that people can go and visit, and it's basically there. What it does is it allows our investors to type in the amount of money that they have invested in the strategy, and it will tell them what the impact is that's associated with that level of investment. So what we do every year, and we're just going into the process this year, is we collect data from the companies that we invest in terms of the impact that their products are having. And then we collect that and aggregate it across, I think it's about 8 different metrics, covering everything from carbon avoided to education, numbers of days of education provided. And we calculate what the aggregate is associated with our strategy based on how much we own of each of the different companies in the portfolio. And then the calculator allows you to just calculate, well, if I own, whatever, £100,000 worth in the strategy, then what does that mean in terms of impact? Yeah. So that's, there's a lot of numbers. It is based on numbers reported by companies. We have a methodology that's been peer reviewed, but it's a very good tool at helping people connect their money with real impact that's happening in the world around us. And I think often money is kind of divorced from reality in some ways, become so financialized, you don't really know, it doesn't really feel like it has a real purchase in the real world. So this is kind of trying to help connect those two things. And
just on that, let me interrupt before you explain the engine. That's almost something that you could spin out as its own little business if you wanted to, because to your point, you're making it, things make sense to the end, which is been a big gap.
Yeah, it has been very powerful. I think there are 2 points to say, and it comes with a bit of a health warning. The first point is that there are now quite a few of these impact calculators out there. It's such a good idea. Everyone else, we were the first, but it's been much copied, which is fine.
Sure.
The health warning, though, is that it's really important to understand that it doesn't. Some people have got very confused about this and think that because, say you've got £10,000 in the fund and it avoids 8 tons of CO2 emissions. People think, well, okay, well, in that case, in my real life, I can emit, 8 tons of CO2 and I'm net. And Mark Carney kind of made this mistake the other day. And that's absolutely not what it's about. The carbon the carbon avoided doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever's, using the technology. Right. But what we're trying to do is show that your investment is in the company that's enabling that to happen. So there is a connection. But it isn't. That's why we say it's associated. It isn't. It's not, and it's aligned. It's not something that's owned by the investor. Okay. So that's an important helpful warning. But nonetheless, I think it's a useful tool to try and help people connect with their money with real world impact that's happening.
Okay, great. And then the machine or the engine.
Yeah. So that's something which sits in our investment process. So. Impact is it's not just about reporting information back to our clients. Impact sits at the heart of our investment decision making as well. And we needed a tool and a framework that allowed us to think about and discuss and compare impact across very different kinds of companies, from education at one end through to renewable energy at the other. How do you compare those when they're so different? Well, the impact engine, which is based on the work of groups like the Impact Management Project and Future Fit as well, the Future Fit Foundation, is intended to capture the different dynamics and different characteristics of impact in a systematic way, and that allows us to then have a conversation within the investment team. Do we want to buy this company with this kind of impact, or this other company with a different kind of impact? And we have a framework for discussing that. That's really the point of the impact engine.
Okay, so we don't have time to, we could do another session where we kind of drill down on much more detail, but let me just grab maybe 60 seconds, if you will, on, so you work with the Impact Management Project, and it's trying to measure and compare and report on impacts, and you describe WHEB as an active contributor. So just what usefulness are you getting from that engagement? Why are you spending effort and time as a contributor to that project?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to overplay. The Impact Management Project has been very helpful to us. I don't know how helpful we've been to the Impact Management Project. I participate in some of their online. They have online discussions, which are very interesting with other practitioners. We were involved in some of the early work around that helped set the framework. That's been the extent of our involvement with them. But it's been the framework that they've developed. You can clearly see it in our impact engine. It's not exactly the same because we're listed equities, and this is a meaningful part of our investment process. So we want it to work for us, and that's not exactly what's worked for the Impact Management Project. But if people aren't familiar with it, then I highly recommend their work. It's very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I recently found out one of the students who was in my very first MBA class in 2007 at Keenan Flagler Business School, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, he's now heading up the Center for Sustainable Enterprise. So that was wonderful serendipity to find that. But in talking with him, well, what are you using and what are you teaching students now? He reflected that they're using that at the Center for Sustainable Enterprise. We'll include that in the show notes. And I like that how you've thought about it and adapted to the listed equity space. I think that's novel. One other phrase I grabbed off your materials was deepening the ESG agenda. I just found that to be an interesting little phrase. I don't know if that was just something dropped in there, or is there something more behind that? If there's nothing, we can keep moving. But if there's something,
I can't actually remember where that comes from. It sounds good. I think.
Yes, it does.
But I don't know exactly what I meant by it, to be honest. Sorry.
All good. All right. So I wanted to unpack a few companies, and of course, this comes with the caveats and warnings, and this is not investment advice. We're just talking and exploring here. But Ecolab, familiar with them. They've been involved in the work that we're doing, that I'm doing at Green Beers and the big Green conference. And then Dakin Industries. For me, I talk now about air conditioner privileged lives. I first found myself talking about this back in 2019 at a private equity event in Africa, when it just struck me how there's some people on the planet who live with air conditioning and work with air conditioning, but there surely must be billions of humans who do not sleep every night in air conditioning. I don't. Growing up, we didn't, and in Durban, South Africa, and I think there's a trillionaire. Whoever figures out zero carbon air conditioning is going to be a trillionaire. So maybe just those two companies, and then I want to come to HelloFresh after that.
So so in terms of the kind of the impact case, I guess, and the investment case for those businesses.
Yeah.
So maybe we start with Daikin. So they, as you sort of mentioned, they're a large manufacturer of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment. This is one of the stocks actually that we discussed with our advisory committee, because obviously the power requirements for HVAC, and particularly air conditioning, are humongous. Yeah. And Daikin's Scope 3 emissions are just a little bit smaller than France's. So they are vast, and of course that's every Daikin product that they've ever sold on the market. So it's and that's France's annual number, but it's huge. The investment or the impact case with Daikin is kind of twofold, really. The main one is around resource efficiency. So they have technologies around the inverters, the AC equipment itself, as well as the refrigerant, which is also a big part of the footprint, that on average is around a third more efficient. It allows you to operate air conditioning at around a third less energy intensity than the average that's on the market as a whole. Okay. And that's kind of the principal case that we have with Daikin, is that they are the more efficient player. So there's carbon that's avoided if you use Daikin in preference to someone else. Of course, it's electricity powered. So as we decarbonize our electricity network, so their own footprint will come down in line with that. But that's the main case. The other case is, it's sort of interesting, your what did you call it? AC privileged existence. The way I think about this is increasingly from a very northern European perspective. I think we've often seen AC as being a luxury, but we certainly wouldn't see heating as a luxury in the north of Scotland. I mean, it's very difficult to live comfortably. And so in the same way, why should we consider AC to be a luxury if you live in Pakistan or India? And as the world continues to warm, increasingly it won't be a luxury. It'll literally be a necessity. So there is a sort of adaptation play there as well. But it's really around, we need, as you say, we need much, much more efficient AC equipment. And we think Daikin is one way of doing that. So that's Daikin. Ecolab, completely different theme. For us, it's around water management. There is a resource benefit from them as well. Their products and services are really a very diverse range of markets that they sell into. They sell essentially sort of cleaning equipment, sanitation equipment into almost everything that you can imagine. And their big USP is around helping their clients do that more efficiently in a way that reduces energy use and particularly reduces water use. They've been a leader in both of those aspects for some time. It's not an uncontroversial industry. They do have chemical manufacturing as well as part of their business. They, I think, do a pretty good job at managing that. The focus is very much on water efficiency, particularly, and also energy efficiency with Ecolab.
Got it. And I'd have viewers and listeners go and check the Seb talking to a chemical engineering society. Maybe it's on YouTube. He makes some interesting points there. So HelloFresh, literally just tried it this week. We've been bombarded with the YouTube adverts. Maybe you have too. So finally, the family broke down and said, okay, we'll try this thing. Delicious food. Love the menus. Hate the wrappers. We actually canceled, and it was bittersweet. I was on Twitter earlier saying, can you not at least solve a premium offering? We'd even pay a bit more. But too much plastic. And I know HelloFresh is apparently one of the better ones compared to some of the other vendors. So what do you do about all the plastic here?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And it came up also with our advisory committee. It's a new investment for us. So I think we only invested maybe a couple of months ago now. Okay. And we discussed it with the advisory committee earlier this month. And that was one of the points they raised. The big benefit, well, there are two benefits with HelloFresh, and then I'll come back to the plastic packaging. The main one, and the reason that we've invested in it, is around well-being and healthy eating. Yeah. And it makes fresh vegetables, fresh food much more accessible to people, because they literally, and we get it as well. And I, as a non-cook, it's just it's a lifesaver, really.
Even you can do it, right?
Yeah. And it really does make, so you use fresh products, fresh produce, and as a non-cook, you can do it. And that's the main thing. There is also a big food waste saving as well. They claim to reduce.
And that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Food waste significantly because of their business model. But like you say, there is a problem with the packaging, because they provide you with the ingredients pre-measured so that you only use what you need, which obviously saves on the waste, but it brings with it lots of packaging. They are trialing new packaging materials in some of their more mature markets, mostly in Germany and Austria, where they've cut plastic packaging by half and using a lot more.
Okay, well that's good.
So they are. They're on it. It's a pilot phase out there, and they'll hopefully roll it across the rest of the market. But it's something that we will continue to engage them on because it's clearly an area of concern. And if you're, as a customer, not signing up as a consequence, then that's something that they should be concerned about.
There you go. Well, thank you. So let's come to wrap part 2 of our deep dive here with something that matters to you, matters to me, I think. But let me just hear from you. Do you agree that greenwashing is real, and why does it matter to the work you do personally, Seb, and to the shop?
Yes, it's definitely real. It was was it last week that, was it Tarek, or maybe it was this week, Tarek Fancy, was that his name, in USA Today?
Yeah.
Making this point. I thought he slightly over-egged it, basically saying
That's a great British phrase. Could you give that to us again, please?
He over-egged it. He over-egged the pudding, is the full expression. Put too much egg in it, overdid it. It's certainly not true that every aspect of ESG is greenwash. I mean, that may be true. Far be it from me to make this allegation, but if you work for BlackRock, maybe you feel that's the case.
Yeah.
It's not just WHEB. I mean, we are in this properly, and there are lots of other managers are as well.
Right.
But it does matter because, I mean, in a way, there's a bit of me which thinks it's great because clearly there's value here, and everyone wants to have a part of it. And in a way, that's progress from where we were before, where no one thought it was valuable at all, so didn't want to market it. But it's quite important that we kind of sift the wheat from the chaff pretty quickly and find ways of ensuring that that those who have less integrity and are less committed to this space are unable to continue to market themselves in that way. And there are well documented steps that various jurisdictions are taking to try and address that.
Right. And I mean, Brexit forced you guys to change your distribution model in UK, Europe, or maybe, but I know, well, in Europe, we've got the new standard. Oh, they're not quite standards, but the definitions, explanations of categories of funds. How does that affect you?
Yeah. There's a taxonomy, and there's also something called SFDR, which I won't go into the boring detail of, but there are 3 different categories. Article 6, if you just don't care about this at all. I'm obviously paraphrasing, really.
Yes.
Article 8, if you care a little bit, but are a little bit cautious about overclaiming, and Article 9, if you're all in. And as I hope you'd expect, we are Article 9.
Yes.
But that forces people to make decisions. So that's something, at least. I think it's a small step in the right direction. It certainly has its issues, but.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say all of the original season will be Article 9, as you call them.
You're listening to the ESG and Coffee podcast, hosted by Graham Sinclair. Sie hören den ESG and Coffee podcast. Ihr Gastgeber ist Graham Sinclair.
All right, so let's change speech here. Another round of espresso shot questions. Time to grab a quick sip as we go again. So round 3, you ready, Seb?
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. Do you have a favorite type of tree, and what is it?
Honestly, not really. I mean, lots of trees that I like. I live in a place called Ash Ridge, which is a ridge covered in ash trees, so I feel like I should probably say ashes.
Nice. Do you follow Alistair Campbell's Tree of the Day on Twitter? I've seen him.
No, I don't. Am I missing out?
Well, it's just interesting to me that a famous politician, pseudo UK politician, he's doing this Tree of the Day. I thought it was novel, so I've checked it out a bit. What one book on investing would you recommend?
I very much enjoyed it's called Quality Investing by AKO Capital Management. It's I don't read a lot of investing books cover to cover, but I really did enjoy that. That was very insightful and reflects a lot of what we do at WHEB as well.
Okay, we'll grab that and put that in the show notes. Thanks, I'm not familiar with that. Then how is your own retirement fund invested? Just very, very quickly.
Well, it's mostly in WHEB.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
My brother thinks I'm massively overexposed to WHEB as my salary.
I would say concentrated. I think yes. Yeah.
Overly concentrated, yeah. But I believe in what we do, and it's been I'm very happy with that. I do also invest in 2 other funds. Obviously, this isn't investment advice either, but the Threadneedle Social Bond Fund, which is a great product in the UK, very much focused on social impact. And then a business called Abundance Investment, which has a kind of online platform where you can get into individual projects. So just trying to kind of diversify across different asset classes. And that's Abundance is all, again, obviously all sustainable, a lot of renewable energy projects, social housing, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a great method. Right, and then what advice would you give to the 17-year-old self today, the Seb of 17-year-old?
Yeah, I mean, nothing very, I mean, I was thinking about this. I think probably don't worry too much, something like that. I mean, I was a very angst-ridden teenager.
Oh, yeah? Did you have peroxided hair? I can't picture you with peroxided hair. I know that was a thing.
No, I was a kind of sporty person. I didn't look after my appearance very well, I don't think. I wasn't that interesting.
And you'll notice I have not mentioned the Rugby World Cup 2019 at all on this call. I haven't mentioned it.
Until now, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, look at that. What is your advice to people seeking to enter the field of ESG investment and finance tomorrow? So someone calls you and you've got 60 seconds. What would you say?
Yeah, I think if you're coming in, I hope you're coming in because you're passionate about these issues.
Okay.
Because that's the best reason for coming into this area. And if you're passionate about it, look for high standards. Don't compromise. Don't allow people to get away with greenwashing. I think the more that you stick to your principles, the more valuable you'll actually be to your employer. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think it's very powerful. And I'm finding more and more conversations or incidents that are happening. And my first check is, what do the employees think about what just went down? Yeah, we can think about regulators and other stakeholders, but now more and more it's like, there's talented humans who are working there and they've got to be up for it every day, right? And enthusiastic about going to work. And if you feel let down by your company, not a good thing.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so let's for the last time have a deeper look at your role and the shop. In part 3, I wanted to immediately ask you in terms of reporting, PRI reporting. I know you got the quarterly reporting to clients and so on. And there was a great report back you did, I think, to an Australian distributor on YouTube. What is that?
Yeah, Pengana. Was that Pengana?
There we go. Yeah. So I'll include a link to that. But in terms of your PRI reporting, and they're always trying to improve their standards. I'm always giving the PRI, pressure on maybe the tent is a little bit too big, and anyone can kind of slip into the tent. So a quick take on what does your 2021 reporting look like?
Yeah, well, one of the benefits, as far as I'm concerned, of being a bit bigger as a business is that I am not actually having to do all of that myself this year for the first time. I have done it for the last 8 years, so it's quite nice to have some support. And so my wonderful colleague Rachel Montero is leading on our reporting this year. There are a few new areas because they have kind of rejigged it a bit. That I'm going to have to do, but I've got the draft to read. I had intended to do it today, but it's probably going to be Monday now.
This podcast is way more important anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then I want to pick up. You put a tweet out around a petition to save our bees and to add the name. I think this might have even been late last year, early this year. What is that about?
Well, so this, I won't go into too much detail, but it's about a class of chemical called neonicotinoids, which are used or have been used across Europe and probably around the world, I'm sure. And they're very toxic to bees in particular. And as I'm sure everyone knows, bee populations are in trouble at the moment. And so the European Commission actually banned them a couple of years ago, I think, or certainly 2 of the main ones that are used. And then the UK government decided to, as a consequence, Brexit means we can now make our own decisions. That's great, isn't it? Well, let's go and allow one of these neonicotinoids to be used again. And that was one of the things they did earlier this year. They have, to their credit, now gone back on it. And it was something, I don't know the details, but it's something to do with the weather, meant that it wasn't going to be used anyway. So, but that was a petition to put pressure on them to withdraw that approval.
Got it. Okay. So then let's look at the WHEB Sustainability Fund in more detail. I'm not sure if you shared this with me proprietary or if it's on your website or you can just explain, but it's got a bit of a breakdown. I think some of this comes from the fact sheet that's on your website, in fact. So some things that jumped out at me, holdings, 47, your holding period, 4 to 7 years, which is clearly long, on the very long to long end of a lot of equity, listed equity portfolios. So maybe pick up on those two aspects, and then I want to talk a bit about a holding.
Yeah, so we have a relatively concentrated portfolio. I mean, it's now 45 stocks actually, and which feels about the right number. We want to be long-term, thorough. We want to do a lot of engagement with the companies that we own. There's a lot of work to do around each portfolio holding. So although we've now got a team of 5 on our investment team, soon to be 6, which will allow us to do even more deep work. We feel like 45 is probably the right number to give us good exposure across those 9 different themes that we talked about earlier on. So it used to be much higher actually. It's come down to 45.
That makes sense. Yeah, I would, if I'm pushing or I'm working as the ESG architect, I'm always pushing you to be more concentrated because it's the higher conviction, right?
Yeah. So so that's the number. And then in terms of the holding period, I mean, in a way that kind of goes with the territory to a degree, at least. If you're investing in a business, if you're genuinely investing in a business, with a thesis around impact, that isn't going to, it's unlikely that that's going to play out very quickly. So the kind of time frame that we typically think about is 5 years. Is this investment going to work over 5 years? Which gives you time to see a new product being picked up by the market and widely deployed. It can happen more quickly than that if the market gets very excited about something that you own. You might decide that actually on valuation grounds, it makes sense to sell something. But typically even then we might reduce our weight in that particular stock, but we'll still want to own it for the long term.
Okay, so I want to come back to Vestas, so just tag that, but I want to skip forward. I read this prospectus because I'm an analyst and I read stuff, 120 odd pages. You may want to pare some words out of that, unless your lawyer says you need 120 pages. But I'm going to quote a section here because it ties to what you just said and how we spoke about the holding period. Quote, "The investment manager will regularly monitor the companies in which the fund invests against the above sustainable investment criteria. If it is the investment manager's opinion that an investee company no longer meets the sustainable investment criteria, the investment manager will not make any further investments in the company and will seek to realize its investment in such a company in an orderly fashion," unquote. So talk to me a bit about, so there's the engagement, there's the holding period, you may downsize the weighting, what have you. But this also talks a bit to and answers the question of those people, well, you can't engage forever. My view, to clear my bias, you can't engage forever. There's got to be the hard stop at the end. All relationships end. And in this case, there would be some performance fail by the company on ESG grounds. So can you just talk a bit about, when the journey ends and exiting?
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a couple of stocks that I can give you examples of this over the last few years, and one's very recent actually. Sometimes it happens when a company changes direction or it makes a big acquisition, and that changes kind of the strategy that the company has. There was a business in the US called LKQ, which stands for like and kind and quality. And basically the original business was a kind of salvage business. It basically took components off of wrecked cars, written off cars, and recycled those, reused them actually into, because they were in like of kind and quality of a new part. And so the insurance company could just pay for a reused part rather than a new part. So nice, recycling reuse story. They went and bought a business, this is a few years ago now, which was essentially kind of, pimp your ride kind of business. It's just about making your car look cooler. Absolutely not thematic for us. And it was a big business, and it basically took them in a different direction. And So we sold it. We sold it as a consequence. And then another example, more recent, is a business called Kingspan Kingspan Insulation in the UK. It's a global business, but it's headquartered in Ireland. And they were involved in a horrible incident in the UK involving a tower in the West End of London that burnt. Well, didn't burn to the ground, but it ended up killing 70 people. And Kingspan's product, which was in the tower, there was no suggestion that it was in any way their fault, but the inquiry has revealed a whole revealed a whole level of culture around product safety, which we felt deeply uncomfortable about, and we're not convinced that they're addressing it properly. So we've sold that company as well.
That must have tested your self-discipline, because it would have already been driven down in the market. So then
we will be publishing an article that sort of sets out the thinking that we went through. We were extremely thorough, and we developed a framework for what we consider to be best practice in product safety, and then assess the business against that framework, and ultimately were unconvinced they were really moving strong enough in the right direction.
Okay, great. And then turning to happier events and technology, what I heard described by the head of North America for Ørsted as spinning assets. So wind turbines. Let's talk very quickly about Vestas wind systems. Obviously, a happy portfolio name to hold. What's your view on that? You're going to be holding that for a long time, and where are you having to push them a bit because they could be doing even more, or are they just one of those just happy names to keep in the portfolio and you don't really have to worry about them?
So they are, I guess the first point is in terms of the investment case around Vestas. I mean, it's obviously, it's a wind turbine manufacturer. It's 100% focused on either, various parts of the wind turbine industry, development of projects, manufacture, maintenance of turbines. They do all of those things, but it's a great business. We think the market under appreciates just how much wind power we're going to need, not just for electricity generation as we shift away from fossil fuel, but also for green hydrogen production as well, which has obviously been a very popular investment theme recently. In a way, all roads really lead to Vestas. They're the market leader. They have the best returns. They're the sort of highest quality operator. It's not cheap as a stock, but we think that the long-term growth potential is enormous. As more and more countries commit to going net zero carbon, wind is going to be a big part of the solution there. So obviously very thematic. But no business is perfect, and Vestas is no exception. And the issue that we've been engaging with them about, them and a supplier of theirs that we also own called TPI Composites, is around the recyclability of wind turbine blades.
I saw that they bury the old blades. Is that right?
They bury them. That's quite common. They burn them. They're not recycled at all at the moment. And Vestas have a commitment to it's like, I can't remember exactly, but they've set a date. It isn't too far away where they want it all to be 100% recyclable. Of course, we have legacy wind turbine blades that are now spinning tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them. So there'll need to be a solution for them as well. But they are on it, and we're pushing them to be aggressive about that.
Okay, great. Let's come and land then for part 3 of the deep dive. I'm writing a book on the history of ESG. It's meant to be easy reading, so it's not necessarily kind of nerdy on ESG. But I'm asking good people and colleagues in the industry, what one moment, if you were to read a book on the history of ESG in 100 moments, what one moment for you would absolutely need to be in there, and why is it meaningful to you?
Yeah, I think the moment, I mean, there are lots, I think, but one that really sticks in my mind is, and it's not so much a moment, but it's the idea that the guys at Carbon Tracker came up with around unburnable carbon and a carbon bubble, or that sort of language around liability.
Stranded.
Sorry?
And the stranded asset.
And it's exactly the stranded assets that really captured the imagination, I guess, of the investment community in a way that those issues previously hadn't really managed to kind of cut through. And the guys there, Mark Campanale particularly, and a guy called Nick Robbins as well, who are both former employees of Henderson as well, really, I think, did us all a huge service and kind of, in many ways, really doing, for the first time, getting mainstream financiers kind of engaged in this conversation. And that was, no question, that was a turning point, which a lot of what has happened subsequently kind of can point to as a key as a key moment.
Yeah, it's wonderful to actually see those phrases be referenced now. It received wisdom in the same way that 2018 Larry Fink's letter, climate risk is investment risk, just that sentence, but what's also a little bit frustrating is what they did in 2009, 2010, somewhere there, and I did some work for them with a government employees pension fund in South Africa doing the carbon footprinting, is you could still take the report back to some of those investment committees and you'd still be starting that whole conversation from scratch. Right. So it's very exciting how it's moved in many ways and absolutely intellectually moved the conversation, and practically too in practice. Also frustrating, so many places we're still having to start there. Good.
You're listening to the ESG and Coffee podcast, hosted by Graham Sinclair. Вы слушаете ESG and Coffee podcast. С вами Graham Sinclair.
Good. Okay. Thanks so much. Let's coming into land now. We'll start off with some espresso shot questions, and then I've got the Goldilocks question to end with. So ready for some more espresso shot questions, Seb?
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. Here we go. So these are mashed up from inside the Actors Studio and the Proust questionnaire that you get at the back of the Vanity Fair. So it helps us learn a bit more about you. Question 1: what is your favorite word?
Yeah, I had to think hard about this. I'm not sure I've got a favorite word, but I, for the purposes of this podcast, I think probably kindness is my favorite word.
What is your least favorite word?
Curate. That's much easier. I think people use the word curate all the time, and it's quite irritating.
Guilty? Won't use it again. What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of birdsong. That's easy as well, particularly in spring, which finally we're getting to here in the UK.
Good. What sound or noise do you hate?
I hate the sound of those souped up motorbikes. I can't understand why that's legal.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'd love to be a bicycle mechanic. That would be my alternative.
What
career.
Profession other than your own would you not like to attempt?
I would hate to be a bouncer at a nightclub. I would be very bad at it. There's nothing but downside in that job.
I did not see that answer coming, and I thank you for it. It's my day. Which living person do you most admire?
Yeah, there's a few, but there's one gentleman who perhaps isn't as well known as I think he should be. He's a guy called Jeremy Leggett. I don't know if you've heard of him, Graham, but he's he was originally a professor of oil engineering at Imperial College in London. He was basically training petroleum engineers. He saw the light around climate change, became a campaigner, became Greenpeace's kind of lead campaigner on climate change. Then became an entrepreneur, set up a business called Solar Century in the UK, which was one of the UK's first solar businesses, and has recently sold that and has bought, he's done very well out of that, and he's bought an estate, sorry, that's my dog in the background, in Scotland, which he's now rewilding. He's an absolute legend, and he's done all of these things brilliantly. So
wonderful.
Yeah, definitely a fan of Jeremy's. Nice.
What talent would you most like to have?
I'd love to be able to sing well.
Plus one. If you were to die and come back as a person or a thing, what would it be?
Yeah, nothing very edifying. I think I'd love to be able to fly, so I'd say an eagle. I'd love to come back as an eagle.
Nice. And to land with our espresso shot questions, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
After a year of lockdown in the UK, I think just going to the pub and having a pint outside in the sun with friends would be just bliss.
Excellent. And an instant top 5 UK-based answer to the podcast. Thank you. It'll stay on the charts for the year, I should think. Right. Before I ask the final question, is there any one question or topic you really, really wanted to talk about and we just haven't got to?
No, I think it's been pretty thorough. I've enjoyed the conversation, Graham. Lots of interesting questions. So excellent. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Right. So to the Goldilocks question, my final question. One share of Tesla, TSLA, was trading at yesterday's close on NASDAQ at $640 odd, up 1.6% for the day. Another interesting day in Tesla land. Is that too high, too low, or just right? And why?
Well, it's either way too high or way too low. My view is, I think that it's way too high. I think Tesla, I mean, it's not a company that we probably own anyway because we are uncomfortable with the governance and some of the labor issues that they have. But our view is that battery electric vehicles are absolutely the future. The whole industry is moving that way, no question about that. Whether Tesla will continue to dominate that industry is definitely an open question. So you can believe in the former without believing in the latter. You can believe in battery electric vehicles without believing necessarily in Tesla. And for my money, the safer bet anyway is definitely that battery electric vehicles are going to become dominant, and you can invest in all sorts of businesses that make components that go into Teslas, but also go into Volkswagens, go into Renaults, go into Nissans, go into every electric vehicle.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, you've been a great sport, Seb, partner and head of research at WHEB Asset Management. You're one of the originals. So hear this from me. Thank you for your hard work over many years, making new paths in the practice of investment and finance. I like to say the investments you make become the world that we live in. Thank you for trying to make it better. And thank you so much for joining me on the ESG and Coffee podcast today.
Thank you. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
And now we keep the tape rolling to hear from Graham and his guest as they reflect on their discussion and anything they wanted to add.
Well, that was a really packed interview. Thank you so much, Seb. For I think we covered a lot of ground. This is the bonus tape. So I'd like to pick up here anything you feel like we missed or something you'd like to expand on further or to clarify. So first up, Seb, is there anything you felt we missed?
Well, we covered, like you say, we covered a lot of ground, but I think one thing that's increasingly on our minds is the whole issue of nature and biodiversity, and this kind of recognition that we are getting our arms around climate change and carbon, but there's this almost even bigger thing that we need to integrate into financial markets and into investment processes, and that's how do we ensure that the fabric of the natural world as a whole is protected and regenerated, actually. And it feels like we're still just getting started on that. It's probably where we were 15 years ago with carbon and climate change, but it's a critical thing that we have to move more quickly. We don't have 15 years to get our arms around that one. So that's something that we didn't touch on, which I think.
We did have a quick chat about the bee situation, right? And those chemicals. So that's a small example, but obviously pollinators, it plays out throughout the kind of the food system and so on. It sounds like a big lift. I know intellectually for me, I'm getting pieces of it. And I know we at the Greenfin conference, we had a session or two on nature. It does seem like so big to get your arms around. Do you have any early ideas about how it'll play out for you at the shop?
Well, and the thing that we're interested in is business models where the kind of the service or the product is biodiversity. In the same way that we have business models where the product or the service is reduced carbon, we need to have that same frame, I think, when we think about biodiversity. And there are small examples of where that happens, where you have an economic interest in preserving, for example, upland areas in the UK, and preserving their capability to capture and retain water. The economic value is you have less flooding downstream. So there's value of preserving and enhancing that biodiversity. But they're quite small and limited examples, and we obviously need to make this much, much bigger and covering a whole range of other kinds of ecosystems. But I think we're just seeing little glimpses of where it works, and it's been made to work because there's already an economic interest there, and we need to, we'll need regulation and other things to help channel develop those frameworks in other areas as well.
Okay, good. I was hoping, if you don't mind, I'm just reflecting back quickly now, and I don't think we covered performance in much detail at all. Could you just touch on that? I mean, we are an investment podcast after all.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's something that we want to talk about, and sometimes we're slightly restricted in the way we can talk about it by regulations. So I'll just need to be mindful of that. But I mean, overall, we've been running this strategy now for 9 years at WHEB, and we're very proud of our performance. We outperform the average global equity fund in the UK market, at least. And we're pretty close to the MSCI World, which is our benchmark, which has done extremely well over that time period. The reasons why we differ from the benchmark, the main one actually, is that we don't own any of the FANGs. We don't consider those businesses to be offering a solution to a sustainability challenge, so we don't invest in them. And they've obviously done extraordinarily well over that time frame. So we think, in the absence of owning FANGs, actually our performance is extremely good. But that's one of the reasons why it differs from the benchmark. And we talk about this a lot in our quarterly webinars. So if people are interested, they can log onto our website and get more information there.
Okay, and so those it's online and you can listen in. It's like an analyst call. Okay.
Yes, I think anyone is welcome to listen in. Certainly, they are available subsequently as well, so you can just download it.
Yeah, we'll include in the show notes. Thanks so much, Seb. So, Seb, is there anything else you want to expand on? Anything you want to clarify from my comments? I mean, we had to move quite quickly.
Yeah, I guess there's one thing which it's sort of for a lot of more sophisticated investors, the key thing that they're trying to, I think, get to is what is happening in the fund manager's head when he or she is making the decision to invest, because that is the most important thing. And how important is impact or ESG or sustainability in that decision? And all the documentation that fund managers produce is in a way trying to crystallize that thought process and make it accessible to people. But it is inevitably a bit intangible. And I think you come back to what is the fundamental belief of the manager. And with a business like WHEB, where we only exist because we're interested in positive impact, I think you can be confident that is absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to do. But it's a sort of difficult thing to pin down, because it's a thought process that you're trying to understand. But we talked about it a bit, but I think that's often the kernel of what's most important.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Seb. I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your Earl Grey tea and your carrot cake. And I promise the next time, and some future season when we have you back on, I hope you'll come back on, is we will tape it early in the morning, East Coast time, so you can be enjoying your coffee when you're being interviewed on the ESG and Coffee podcast.
Thank you very much, Graham.
That was a wonderful conversation with Seb Beloe at WHEB Asset Management. I'll run through some high points from the episode for me, and I'll try and do this with every episode so you have a succinct view on the conversation that's just happened. First of all, I think it's important to identify that WHEB Asset Management, where Seb Beloe has made his home for nearly a decade, is a self-described positive impact investor focused on opportunities created by the transition and a sustainable global economy, unquote. And to be clear, WHEB Asset Management has a single global equity strategy, so it makes them quite easy to talk about it as a shop. They're not doing a variety of asset classes, a variety of strategies. So it was a very useful way to begin a whole series, I thought, and a good entry point for a number of aspects of the conversations. You'll see they'll get more detailed as we interview other people from different types of shops. Importantly also that strategy has been tested across market cycles. I think it's fair to say that. And then significant for me is that the shop is a owner-managed partnership. And so they're incentivized to take the long-term decisions, and here self-described as 5 years plus. I think that's really a strong differentiator. If you sitting as an institutional decision maker, as an asset allocator, choosing between different investment firms or different strategies, and in front of you is a small shop, but that shop is all in on their one strategy, I think it's very clear on what they do. Also important, reflecting the ramp up just in the last 2 years of WHEB's asset size, is the fact that they're hiring, and there will be again. So be sure to listen twice to the interview and then maybe submit your resume. Also, maybe The Big Short is one of your favorite investment movies too, and I've posted some links to some of those fabulous clips where they do the kind of explainer on how financial markets work, as much as the whole Mark Baum, which is Steve Carroll's character, when he's asking those questions of bankers and mortgage brokers and trying to understand what exactly is going on. That's a fun series. Second big point would be WHEB uses the external accountability check with the Independent Investment Advisory Committee, which meets 3 times a year, and they review the fund's holdings and ensure that the fund is meeting both the letter and the spirit of the fund's sustainability criteria. And it's important that we hear how they've tested Seb and his team on their reasoning and how they've looked to execute that. Of course, this committee cannot overrule investment decisions, but the fact that they do weigh in and potentially may change a process is really a solid approach. And that you get paid more than coffee money for the expertise nowadays. I think this is a wonderful mechanism. It's something I've used on all of my projects in different shapes and forms, and something I strongly encourage anyone who's running their own shop or their own strategy to have that either formally or informally. A third point would be that the WHEB investment strategy is built around, quote, sustainability, growth, quality, and valuation, unquote. There's a lot there, and in fact, if you look at some of their marketing materials in the fund prospectus, you can see how they describe that in more detail. And as anyone who's a student of investment decisions and ESG integration, there's maybe something to learn from or model from there. WHEB is categorized as Article 9 in the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure, and hopefully we'll see, frankly, every investment company finding its way to being described under Article 9. For now, we know there are many, many other strategies out there where they're investing in portfolio companies that don't pay for their pollution, for example. And importantly, as we fight greenwashing, it's going to be critical to clarify what strategies are actually doing what they say on the tin. And I think the new EU sustainability marketing regulation forces investment professionals to make decisions on how much or how little they will present as being sustainability positive or ESG integrated. Seb also explained how biodiversity in investment is just getting started. I think 2023 is a task force on nature-based financial disclosures will be putting out their guidelines. And Seb considers it to be about where climate, pollution, and carbon was about 15 years ago. Fourthly, in terms of portfolio names, we had some fun around HelloFresh SE, listed in Germany, where Seb has argued that the healthful eating option and generating least food waste outweighs the footprint of the plastic wrappers. I'm still yet to be convinced, but I am watching closely and happy to see what happens with the pilot projects that they're trying in Germany and Austria around their packaging. And then in terms of Dakin industry, well, this episode drops during the summer, the Northern Hemisphere summer right now. We've already just had the heat dome situation happening in the northwest of the US and Canada. Canada's highest temperature this year is higher than anywhere in Africa for the whole year. Huge changes in weather systems are happening, exacerbated by climate change. And so exploring any kind of HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning is going to be important. I still think it's important to talk about air conditioner privileged lives, but interesting to hear Seb's counterpoints there. And a reminder, disclaimer, anytime we talk about portfolio names or investment ideas, no part of this series constitutes an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities mentioned or discussed. Do your own research, make up your own mind. A curiosity for me, I did not expect Seb's answers on the WHEB approach to the price of climate pollution in CO2 equivalent per ton. Not being pulled through from the portfolio companies. I consider that kind of an open item where Seb and his team may want to explore that a bit further, just for the clarity that brings in terms of the data that they're pulling through from those portfolio companies and the clarity of the messaging that they get that we're in a climate crisis, and knowing what your companies are doing is critical in navigating this fast-moving regulatory environment as well as the expectations of customers and employees. What do you think? Drop us a note on Twitter. And finally, on greenwashing and Tesla, Seb agrees that greenwashing is a problem and for the investment industry, and WHEB as a pure play sustainability investment shop obviously can't compete with the level of marketing that's happening from some of the mega investors and their green spin. He says also that Tesla is either too high or too low. Kind of dodged me on that question. We'll have to ping him on that at some other time. Before making the investment case for his preference, which is actually the component manufacturers for battery electric vehicles. So I just thought to give you some quick high points from the interview from my perspective. It was a great place to start. Very excited to share with you some of our other interviews and still scheduling interviews. If you have any good ideas on people we should absolutely bring on to ESG and Coffee, please drop us a note on Twitter at ESG and Coffee. Thank you so much for listening.
We hope you enjoyed the interview with one of the originals in investing, strategy, and sustainability. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform or on YouTube and leave a 5-star review. Bad reviews you can send to Graham Sinclair at ESG Architect. All the details are in the show notes. And for news of our next guests, follow us on Twitter or Instagram at ESG and Coffee. Do you know an impressive human we should absolutely interview on investment, strategy, and sustainability? Please let us know on Twitter at ESG and Coffee. Our producer is Kat Farquharson on Twitter at Kat Farquharson, and original music by Aaron Bonney on Twitter at Aaron Bonney Music. And of course, this podcast is for your enlightenment, not investment advice. Do your own research.
You have been listening to the ESG and Coffee podcast on investing, strategy, and sustainability, hosted by Graham Sinclair.